Hello, I'm Professor Louise Cummings from the Faculty of Humanities at PolyU. I'm here today to describe to you a new book that I've written. The book is called Language Case Files in Neurological Disorders, and I'd like to explain to you a bit about why I've written the book and what it examines. So one of the chief reasons why I wrote this book was I wanted to give prominence to a number of neurological disorders that are often overlooked by speech-language pathologists. This is because these disorders maybe have a slightly lower prevalence than some of the conditions that speech therapists typically assess and treat. So I'm thinking here particularly of corticobasal degeneration, or because these disorders have social stigma attached to them and are often overlooked by speech therapy for this reason. And I'm thinking here particularly of alcohol-related brain damage. All of these disorders have problems associated with speech and language and communication, and they need to be assessed and treated for this reason. The reason why I've used a case study approach in this book is because large-scale quantitative studies often overlook the individual features of an individual's language impairment. And I think it's very important to get to grips with those unique individual features through a case study approach. Also, a case study approach is a very useful way to document a new or emerging condition. And I'm thinking here particularly about language impairment in the context of COVID-19 infection, where we're trying for the first time to describe how COVID infection has affected cognition and language in people, and a case study approach is a very effective way to do that. Another reason why I think a case study approach is important is that it is particularly valuable for training and educating speech-language pathologists. They need to actually see what language impairment looks like in these clients, and that's often not possible when you're using large-scale quantitative research. Case study approach is much better able to characterise the language impairment for trainee clinicians. Another reason why a case study approach is particularly valuable is that for a long time now, clinicians have realised the importance of taking a holistic approach to the assessment and treatment of clients. So we need to understand how a language disorder fits in with the client's social situation, their family, their occupational responsibilities, and that again is not something that we can so readily assess and understand if we operate with sort of large-scale quantitative research. So a holistic approach to the assessment and treatment of these clients is more readily captured in case studies. The book is primarily written for three main audiences. The first audience that I have in mind are students who are training in speech and language pathology or speech and language therapy, and they need to actually work with the data of these clients to be able to make an accurate assessment of how language is impaired and breaks down in them. So that was the first audience that I had in mind when I wrote the book. The second audience is made up of people like neurologists and psychiatrists, and other types of clinicians, geriatricians, for example, who must also work with these clients and understand the language and communication difficulties that they experience. And finally, there was a third audience that I had in mind when I wrote the book. I'm thinking here particularly about the spouses and carers of people with these neurological disorders. They are often experts in the management of the physical symptoms of these adults, but often don't have a particularly strong understanding or appreciation of the language and cognition issues that they experience. So that was also, to my mind, an important audience to address. In terms of what I hope the volume will achieve, there are really three things that were important to me when I was writing the book. I want to give emphasis to disorders that have been historically overlooked by speech-language pathologists. And this may be for reasons of social exclusion or because there's maybe a lack of professional understanding of the clinical needs of these clients. Secondly, I would also like the volume to be used to introduce students in speech-language pathology to conditions that haven't been encountered before. And I'm thinking here particularly about the language impairment. that is now recognised as part of COVID-19 infection. And then finally, I would also like the volume to be used to give some emphasis or focus to language disorders in clients who have traditionally been assessed and treated because of their speech impairment. So I'm thinking here particularly of clients with Parkinson's disease, where there has been for a very long time recognition of the speech disorder dysarthria in Parkinson's disease, and unfortunately the language impairment has not received as much clinical focus as the speech disorder. So those were my three chief aims in writing this volume.